So our guest today is Amanda Hachey. She's the Executive Director of NouLab, which we will learn more about as we explore. Welcome.
Hey Dennis, how are you?
Good. I'd like to start with not necessarily NouLab, but mainstream media is always talking about how young people want to leave this province, and it's a narrative that needs to shift.
Right.
On this show we've had several guests, people in your age bracket and younger, who want to stay here.
Yeah.
You've stayed here.
Mm-hmm.
Can we explore that a little bit about
Sure.
Amanda's journey and why she decided to stay in New Brunswick and make her career?
Yeah, well, I didn't originally decide to stay.
Hmm.
I grew up in rural New Brunswick on the beautiful Belial Bay,
Yeah.
which I didn't realize how beautiful the Belial Bay was. But at that time, I just wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. I did my undergrad in UNB St. John and also was just ready to get out as soon as I could.
Yeah.
I don't know at that time what really the narrative was, other than I just wanted to explore.
Yeah.
You know, I just wanted to get out there and see the world.
You're 23, 24?
Yeah, probably from 19 to 23, I was just like, what are the opportunities out there? And so at that time, there were study abroad programs. I mean, just like there have been for years. And so I went to France and just got the bug. And I traveled a lot. I worked in Washington, D.C. I lived in Panama in Central America for 2 years. And then I came back just long enough to change the backpack and hit the road again. Lived in Vietnam for a year, and then went to school in Sweden, did a master's program in Sweden. So that was over about a 10-year period that I was in New Brunswick long enough to
Change
hang out
clothes.
with the family, visit family, change clothes, and get out again. Yeah.
Can we dive into little bits of that?
Yeah, sure.
Panama, 2 years, what'd you do?
So I studied French my whole life. My mom, I'm as pure Acadian as you can get, but we grew up in southern New Brunswick, speak English at home. So we spoke French at family reunions and always wanted to learn French. So did immersion, went to school, study abroad in France. And then when I lived in Washington, D.C., I wanted to learn Spanish. But I didn't want to do it sitting conjugating verbs in a classroom. I was like, put me on the street somewhere in Latin America and I will learn the language. And so I found a job in Panama. It was a CETA internship, so it was a federal government job for 6 months to start. I thought I was going down to help start small businesses. And I was going down to start a small business for a very wealthy Panamanian. And it was a real estate business. And so 2 years later, here I am speaking Spanish fluently, selling real estate in Panama. So there were lots of things, I was, 23. I was like, whoa, there were so many things that I just didn't realize about how the world worked. Environmental impact assessments were a cost of doing business in terms of development, real estate, locals, we can displace them. That kind of thing about, I had studied business in the textbooks of business, and then I was seeing the reality of how our economy works, and I was just like, man, we can do better.
Yeah.
At this.
Big gap between the school version and real life version.
Yeah, I mean, I was just naive. I didn't even really know what business was when I graduated high school. I thought I wanted to be a dietitian. I loved food and all that. Didn't like my biology teacher in grade 12, so took business. That's...
Yeah.
Those were
those little moments that shift us in a direction.
Right, so it was just like, I didn't like writing. I loved working with numbers, so I wanted to go to university. I wasn't pressured by family or anything to do that. I really wanted to go to university and decided business was the thing. Studied the theory of it for 4 years, and then came out and was like, oh.
Was the theory a little bit of rose-colored glasses compared to what you went through? Because if you read business sections in the newspaper, if you think in political terms, the influence business has over political decisions, whether it's environmental policy or oil companies, there's a very integrated narrative between the role business has in influencing political decisions, and politics supposed to be to help protect people and empower people, and you walked naively and wonderfully right into and in another culture to boot.
Yeah, well, I think that what the school of business was teaching me was how to make good decisions. I think that is what it tries to do. They're leaving out some of the elements of that decision making though in the programming. I was one of those weird kids that did all my electives in political science.
Okay.
Though I think I was like the only one in the faculty doing that at the time. And I was at UNB St. John's, the business campus. The business faculty is in one building, and the social science is in the next building, like 10 meters away.
Yep.
And I'd be in these poli-sci classes learning about how capitalism was ruining the world, and then I'd be in my business classes learning about maximizing profit and making the decisions to do that. And I remember saying to my international relations professor, why isn't this class mandatory in the business faculty?
Yeah,
and her answer was, oh, they know. I was like, no, they don't. They're my friends. They want to do good things in the world.
Yeah.
And they also just haven't necessarily been pushed to think critically, and so they're taking what they're being given.
Yeah.
And when I did study abroad in France...
It's an interesting point.
Yeah. And when I did study abroad in France, there was a class in the business school called Corporate Social Responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned about how, McDonald's and the way they were farming and they were losing customers and none of that, and then like all the things that they were trying to do to basically improve their reputation. But there was an element in there of like, oh, this was not this is now more part of the business programs here, but 12, 15 years ago that wasn't the case. And I remember just thinking like, this shit should be mandatory,
Yep.
So all those light bulbs were just kind of clicking, and when I was in Panama, I was just like, we could do this so much better. We've created the economy. It's not something you need to listen to or like obey. It's something we can make work for us.
Okay. And
so I just had this increased drive of curiosity to better understand how the system worked on a global level. I'm always been a big picture kind of thinker.
But what you just did about we can make this work for us, that is such a subtle shift, Amanda, because most people treat the economy as out there.
Yeah.
And we have to feed the beast.
Yeah.
Oh, the economy, and we treat it as if it's an organic living thing that we're responsible for nurturing.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's something we created from the get-go, and we can keep creating it and morphing it and changing it. So its laws are not rigid or stuck. It's dependent on our activity. Because when I talk to 50 or 60-year-olds, they tend to treat the economy as a staid or static sort of thing, and we have to feed it, like stoking the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And you're coming in with that other perspective. It's like, no, we make it up as we go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So back to Panama, the different culture, 2 years, and then what? Where did you said you went? Sweden, took school?
No, I went to Vietnam. So I had learned Spanish. I had gotten a sense for Latin America, and I wanted to go to Asia. I just had this I want to go see Asia. I want to go see more of this. And I really did have this I want to save the world kind of drive.
Yeah.
And so I got another CETA internship that wasn't selling real estate, but was helping farmers. It was working with agriculture cooperatives. So after the war in Vietnam, there was huge famine issues, and the place was just blown to bits. And so they formed cooperatives for people to share land, share equipment to grow food to eat. It was a sustenance thing 35 years ago. And so, come forward 35 years, and these co-ops starting to be urbanized, members have passed on, members aren't farming anymore. The economy in Vietnam had significantly changed from that time, but the co-ops hadn't moved along to respond to the change. And so I was working there for a year helping those co-ops better respond to the shift and what the current needs were. So that felt a little more like I was doing something, but I was also recognizing how the Vietnamese were so connected with their food, and how the families always ate together and cooked together, and they're looking at me, this Westerner, going there to help teach them, and I was like, wow, you guys could come and teach us how to get better relationships with our food again.
Yeah, I was thinking it would just be a nice place to do a little segue, because New Brunswick doesn't know how to feed itself, or we don't have the ability to feed ourselves because we're importing the majority of our food. Do you think there's things that you learned in Vietnam watching the construction of food cooperatives and farming cooperatives that New Brunswick could integrate as part of its current economy or the new economy for New Brunswick for the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I think there are definitely some things. I mean, there was so much collective approaches to doing things. So sharing farming equipment, sharing land. When one farm, they had, Vietnam has 3 growing seasons, and the place is like they can grow everything, and
Yeah.
everything's abundant. So it is hard to kind of relate with our climate.
Okay.
But you would see certain farmers, if they had, say, a rice field, all the neighbors would come and help with that farm when they needed it. And then say the next season somebody else needed, the seasons were altered and they needed more harvesting, the community would come together and do that. I think much like you used to see in the potato harvesting here in the northern New Brunswick.
Yeah.
There was just still a lot of small scale local market kind of things. That was also shifting in Vietnam. It's been 9 years since I've been there, and I think that's also changed a lot. But lots of just collective approach, and also when you've gone through depletion of your resources, you get really good at using things wisely. And I think they've done that really well. So they would have a farm that would be a rice farm, and then it would flood while the rice was growing. They would put fish in, which would fertilize the rice, and they would also fish those
Harvest
fish
the
and eat
fish,
the protein. And then they would have ducks that would also fertilize the land, and that would also provide a protein when it was the dry season and then all the water went away. And so you were seeing them build ecosystems, so the work that they did was minimized. They didn't need to put heavy fertilizers in because the ecosystem was doing that. And so there are lots of clever things that they were doing because they had to, and these traditions that I think we would need to do it differently here because we have a different ecosystem, but there's definitely some
The perspective and the intent was different. I just wonder at times if New Brunswick will ever catch on that a key to our identity, taught to me ages ago, is forestry, fishing, and farming. Is the fundamental 3 F's of New Brunswick. You can have an IT element. I mean, you can have others, but the core, 80% or 90% of your wealth comes from those things. A lot of attention to forestry and fishing, not so much to farming. That has to start to resurface at some point as a narrative, and we'll need people like you that know it from other places to help build new models instead of the old industrial food model, which gets into local markets and such. Okay, so Vietnam's come and gone, and then so what's fascinating watching you go is small town New Brunswick girl or small province New Brunswick girls out pounding around the world, seeing all these things. I don't want to ask were you scared, because it's obvious from your storytelling you weren't. You were just, wow, look what's going on, it's so exciting. But the distance between home and your travels, because it's more than just the kilometers.
It's time zone, it's it's a whole other world. I don't know where I got it, but I'm fearless, and I was especially fearless at that time in my life and going. I remember moving to Vietnam, no problem. That wasn't, it's like a whole other half a day time zone difference and a completely different culture and weather and everything. Aside from the cockroaches and the spiders, I was completely fine. And that was the things I needed to tell myself, like, we just moved across the globe, we can handle this cockroach. That was like the only moments where I found myself, in a moment of fear. But just this hunger to learn, I think, was the drive. And it was in Vietnam that I realized, I had made significant effort to learn Vietnamese. Very, very different than learning Spanish after you already know French. That came to me quite easily, although that was also a lot of work. Vietnamese was a whole other kettle of fish. And I remember after being there for a year, trying to understand the history, the culture. I was working within government there and trying to understand all the layers to do my job properly, and also the whole purpose I was going to learn more. And just realizing that I am not the one to come and help these people. And I mean any Westerner, what are we doing? And then I started reflecting, like, where do I know what to do and how to help? And then I was starting to reflect on New Brunswick and think about how I know the languages and the history, and seeing a lot of similarities between deficiencies in some of those developing countries and in this developing province. I was starting to make those kind of parallels. And at that time I was also feeling a little bit jaded about, am I ever going to really save the world? and so I may not want to do business anymore. And so I was looking at other options, and then I came across this master's program in Sweden, which was a mix of environmental science and change management. And so I thought, I'll apply, and I got in, and really pivotal moment in my life, personal and professional, best thing I ever did. So that was the shift, I think, for me. Came home and thought I was still going to just drop my bags and apply for jobs in Montreal and Vancouver or Toronto, because what I was doing was helping businesses with their sustainability plans, and I needed head offices, and there weren't enough of them in New Brunswick, that, in my mind, to sustain work that I wanted to do. And very shortly I was applying for jobs, in these other large centers, but I was home and I was kind of just networking, and I was like, man, I have a network here that I could not replace anywhere else.
Yep.
I saw the place in a different light. So all the beautiful things that I saw in Sweden, I came home and I was like, oh, we have that. Oh, we have that. Oh, we have that.
Isn't it striking how, in some ways, we don't know our own province, and
Totally.
and how powerful and beautiful some of it is?
Yeah, and I needed to go away. So I think there's a truth in don't go away, but I needed to go away to come back and appreciate this place in a different way, and to also see so many things. I mean, Sweden is such an incredible example of the way people have integrated work and life in a balance that I have never seen anywhere else, and so we're certainly not nailing it. And their economy, productivity, blows ours out of the water.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, all of these ideas from all the cultures and things come back, and now see New Brunswick as a blank canvas. And I remember I had been home for about a year, and Mom was like, oh, her time's up, she must be. And I was like, no, I'm here. So that was 6 years ago, and I just feel like I'm in the right place. This is the place that needs me. I also feel like when I'm trying to do community change work and give people that vision or hope of like what's possible here from the things that I have seen, I do have the temptation to get everybody on a bus and go away for a while and see what's possible and come back.
Yeah. Interesting. Breaking in. They're not even new ideas, just new to hear ideas.
Exactly.
Because in behind that is the willingness to let go of how you've always done it, which is one of New Brunswick's other narratives. Is like, where especially in the political realm, this is how we vote. So to have the shifts and breakthroughs occur, it has to happen on many different planes, not at the same time, but in a certain relationship to each other. That's where the 30-somethings, as they start to take it over, can make that shift a bit easier. It also sounds, do you think all of this stuff is tied to purpose for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you talk about my work and my life, they're very aligned. I also don't have a fear of never having work. I'm self-employed now. I do contract work. I'm making a very good living for what I want in my life, and I never have this fear of not having a job, which I would feel like that's a huge narrative here in the province, of like looking for that job and not thinking about what can you create.
Yeah, like someone is to give me a job as opposed to what work can I do.
Right. And that, I also understand people are in a position where they do need a job, and we need people to be like that in order to do everything. But I think there's a whole other layer of opportunity that people don't realize. And I don't know if it's from the school system. We're not even I see toys now. Like if you go buy Lego now, there's no Lego to create something.
Yeah.
It's you build the thing that's on the box, and it's only the pieces in that box to build that thing. And so I worry actually that we're creating that.
Totally with you. Being a stay-at-home dad, raising my boys who are now 26, watching the transitions in Lego and watching how my boys chose to play with Lego.
Yeah.
So the kits became more like models rather than you get so many of these pieces, so many of these pieces, see what you create. Fortunately, my guys were wired that they just wanted that model because they were looking for 3 pieces.
Good.
And they never ever built the model. Well, they'd build the model once to say they did it, and then they disassembled it within minutes.
Right.
And then we're looking for certain pieces because they had something they wanted to build. But that's an important shift, because that's an educational shift, whether it's from the school system or the parents, that you go out and you make it up. You go play in the sandbox and you create your community.
Exactly.
And you bring that with you from having watched it and experienced it in other places.
Yeah.
So you land home. Your story sounds very much like my interview with Jean-Marie Nadeau, who's in his late 60s now. Sorry, Jean-Marie, if I have that wrong. So a Acadian activist, you know, but he tells a story of in his younger years traveling around, a bit of that Save the World thing, which is a wonderful altruistic drive. And then coming back home after being away for 5, 7, 10 years, it's like, wait a second, it's right here where I'm supposed to be. So your story is a return home.
Yeah, and
to stay home.
When I returned home in Moncton, there was like this, I don't know, this little perfect storm of a bunch of people my age who had just also returned from their journeys. And that's how we started La Bikerie. We were all just kind of sitting around my kitchen table, and somebody had heard that I was helping with co-op development, and that this other girl who had lived in Montreal and Ottawa, my friend Chrissy, who had experienced bike culture there, and we were all kind of, I'd lived in Vietnam and Sweden, amazing bike cultures, and we were all like, how do we do that here? Moncton, flat. The distances are very short, no matter what you think. You know, we've got this car culture, we got to drive everywhere. So we were like, what could we do that would start creating community around cycling? And we didn't create anything new. Everybody looks at us and goes, oh, you created this thing new. Like, no, we put out a call to all the community bike centers in North America, because there's an amazing community of support. They sent us their financials, their business plans, their lessons learned. They talked to us. And we took the things, like your sons did with the Lego, that we needed out of that, and we made a Moncton version. You know, it's like right from the name, La Bikerie, is like, we wanted it to be the most bilingual organization that it could be, encompassing. We wanted your Canadian Tire 20-year-old bike in the garage person to feel comfortable coming in, who maybe hasn't even used that bike in 30 years, you know? So we wanted it to be that open door thing, and fast forward 6 years. I'm not even a part of it anymore. Actually, none of us are. It's running its own.
The next generation is coming.
And we have, I don't know, 700 members, you know, giving away bikes to people that need them. And anyway, it's just, people look at that as if we started something from scratch, and we did, but it was from this community of support globally who's already done it. And so we took, what are the things that make it New Brunswick? And there's so many things to do that. I keep telling people New Brunswick is such a blank canvas. You know, if we're in Montreal or Toronto, we wanted to do something like that, there's already 6 bike co-ops. There are community bike centers. And then, the list kind of goes on. Yeah.
So the opportunity and the recognition, you get to be first, even though it's not a new idea, but in your domain, you know, your geographic domain, you get to be first. That's an exciting thing. It's not a knock, but in some ways New Brunswick is so far behind it can leap ahead.
Totally.
Because you don't have, and it's a huge asset actually, because you don't have to undo something.
Totally.
I think of that when it comes to the food conversation that needs to be had in this province. The industrial models for economy need to be undone a little bit, so that's a whole other challenge. But in the meantime, we can get on with these other things. And in, public transportation and mobility within communities. The Bikery, maybe do a short blip about, some people might not know what it is. So it's a bike co-op started in Moncton by a group of you people. And you created a board, and how many bikes, how many members? You touched quickly, 700 members.
Yeah, so we have about 700 members now.
And the whole premise of it is?
Yeah, so the premise was that we would create a bicycle center where people could come and learn how to fix their bikes. So the first thing we did was talk to the bike shops in the community. It was like, we're not competing with you guys. It's the Canadian Tire bike that you guys wouldn't even touch, and it's teaching the person how to fix their own brakes. So we have mechanics in there. So they don't do the fixing. They would teach you how to fix your bike. So
did the bike shops understand that?
The bike shops understood that right away and totally supportive, even to this day. I don't know if we can take credit for this, but there have been 2 new bike shops open, and the bike shops that do exist in Moncton have grown since we've started. So the culture of cycling, that's a sign that it's growing. Yeah.
I don't want to lose that point.
Yeah.
That's one of the new narrative shifts that need to occur in this province.
Yeah.
When Marshall Button was on, we got talking about competition in his world with the Capitol Theatre. And he told this lovely story of, there's lots of competition now. There's a cathedral or a church that has 1,700 seats. And then there's that new center opening up downtown. And when the casino opened, He said, our business is up 18%.
Yeah, exactly.
It's changed the shift in the culture. So if we can get away from that competitive model into a cooperative model, cooperative in the sense that we're responsible for a collective culture.
Yeah.
You shifted the culture of biking in Moncton, or your team did.
Yeah.
And as a result, everything picked up a bit.
Yeah. And the thing that we wanted to do, because there was a moment when we started the biker, there was a lot of contention about different bike lanes going in different roads in the city, and people on both sides of the story being very passionate about it. And so we thought, are we going to be an advocacy organization? Or what are we going to be? And we knew we wanted to be, we wanted to make biking, cycling look fun and sexy. And that you didn't need spandex or a super expensive bike. And, you go to Copenhagen and there's people dressed like you on a bike. It's beautiful to see. We wanted people to think of it as an option to get to work and to get around. And all of us had personal experience of how that made our lives better, both from our mental health, from our physical health, from, you bike 10 minutes to work and drive 10 minutes to work and then tell me the difference. I mean, it's a total shift. You see your community differently, you see the trees, you see the people. It just doesn't, that car experience doesn't give you that. And so when we first opened the bikery, we wanted this mandate of making biking look fun. And we're in the fire station, an old fire station on the Riverfront Trail. So there's cyclists kind of going by all the time. And we had a painting party. We're fixing up we're not actually in the bays. We're in the staff room of the fire station. So it's a tiny spot. And, we opened up, and, one of the first times I remember when the shop was finally open, there was a cyclist who's a hardcore cyclist, bikes 365 days a year in the winter, and, be kind of like a rough, burly guy. And there was a young, 8-year-old kid, and then a single mom who, this was her mode of transportation, this is how she got to work. And those three people were, without anybody putting them together, were interacting, joking, laughing, learning together. And I remember the founders, we had all noticed certain versions of that happening, and we were like, we've built a community. And that, if you go to the bikery now, that's what it is. It's a community. And we're in so desperate need of that, I feel like. And so, sure, it's about cycling, and sure, we're getting people active, and we're reducing carbon emissions and all that fun stuff. But we're connecting people in the community, and I think that's what's going to make people stay or want to live in here. So there's so much around that the benefits, kind of ripple out.
Yeah, so much more than just its details, right?
Totally.
It's the intangible comeback.
Totally.
Your story reminds me of community garden stories, where people are meeting each other, they're sharing stories about what they're growing, and suddenly a whole new thing is happening, much more than just growing your plot.
Exactly.
We'll put this on the Facebook link and in the YouTube clips, but you guys have a fun event. I'm just thinking of the images when you do your Tweed ride.
Yeah.
You want to explain that, because that's a community thing, and how many people showed.
Yeah, so this is the kind of core of when we were making cycling kind of fun and attractive is the events that we do. I still say we. I'll always say we, because it's like a baby project, even though I'm still a member but not on the board.
Yeah.
We do a Tweed ride annually, so people get dressed up in their 1930s attire, tweed, and it's for two reasons. Also, to get people thinking about we do it purposely in late October. It's always a cold day, to get people thinking summer's over doesn't mean you got to put your bike away. And also, it doesn't mean you can't dress up to also be on your bike. And so, but it's just a fun thing. We do it on a Sunday, do a little route around town. The photos, giving the image of the streets full of bikes is just like, all of us are just like, this is amazing. And then we've added a few other fun events. So we've got one coming up in a couple of weeks, actually, called the Disco Bike Ride. So this is year 2 of the Disco Bike Ride, actually. And so we usually have 50 to 100 people come out for the Tweed ride. We have had people drive from Fredericton to Moncton to go to the Tweed ride, like working on their outfits all year. So for the disco ride, we thought we'll probably get around the same, around 100. But we do it in conjunction with a mural festival that's like an arts festival that's happening in town. And it's also about like looking visible when you're biking at night. But it's, but we have a DJ on a trike. He's got speakers. He's playing disco music. And we do a tour of the murals that have been painted through that week. And everybody's got the glow-in-the-dark stuff and they're dressed like disco. And so last year, we didn't really know how many people were going to show up. It starts just when it's starting to get dark. I think we had about 250 people show up last year. And so this is event 2. We'll see how many people show up this year. Yeah, but it's just been, and we've had the mayor come on the rides with us. And it's just great fun. Yeah. So it's, we could do a video to say, put a light on your bike or do pamphlets, or we could do a disco ride, and it says the same thing, and people, it's also building community, and people are having fun, and all the things,
vibrant stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's slide a little bit into NouLab.
Yeah.
Because one of New Brunswick's narratives is always about its economics, its opportunities. The province in general might need to recognize how much we already do have, rather than we describe ourselves in the sense of this is what we don't have. And then start from there. And then that creative element that you've spoken to 2 or 3 times, like, well, let's do it this way or that way.
Yeah.
So you can walk us through a quick intro to NouLab, and then whatever juice is flying in your world around that.
Sure. So about 2 years ago, the Pondish Pondé Center on UNB campus and the Social Policy Research Network, they're both about 5 years old organizations. Pondish Pondé Center is around kind of engaging that entrepreneurial spirit and social entrepreneurship as an option. And the Social Policy Research Network is working on how do we connect all the amazing research that's happening at our post-secondary institutions with policy decision makers and the community, so they can actually use that information to make decisions. So those 2 organizations had been hearing about these social innovation labs and thought, that's a perfect kind of match of the 2 things that we're trying to do. So they created NouLab 2 years ago, which is a social innovation lab. There's lots of new jargon in the world of work that I do. And so it's like a lab, a science lab, with a white coat and, little beakers, and you're doing tests, except we don't wear white coats, and the tests that we do are social kind of experiments. So what we do is we apply kind of the innovation infrastructure that we're seeing working really well in the IT industry or in the private sector. When they need to do innovation, they've got it doesn't just happen like people think there's an apple that falls from the tree and something's innovation. No, there's actually a practice and a rigor around it that helps increase the chances of an innovative idea coming out. So we're using a lot of that great methodology, and then we're matching that with participatory processes like the art of hosting kind of things. And so what we're doing is bringing government, community, nonprofit, private sector around the table together, and then applying these innovation methodologies to kind of tackle some of those legacy social environmental problems that we've been trying to tackle and really not moving the needle on for years. Yeah.
Can you give us a little peek into some of that innovation methodology? One, for instance, because it'll ground it in a specific.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things is, one of the quotes that we use often is that we create problems as systems, and then we try to solve them individually. And you hear all the time that we got to stop working in silos. We hear that all the time, and very rarely do we have vehicles to facilitate that. And that's what we're doing. So and then we also, the process that we take people through is often people will have identify a problem, and they'll often go, oh, here's a solution. And so we take them back and say, what's the real problem here? And the other thing with doing this in a group is we all, and especially from these different sectors at the table, we all have a different perspective of the problem, and we all think that our perspective is the most important piece of the problem. And in actual fact, the problem is a collection of all of those perspectives. And so we help don't think of your solution yet. So we just did a session yesterday with some provincial government policymakers, and they all came to us with problems, and then the whole afternoon we said, no, what's the real problem? because often there's a solution embedded in there, and they've gone to solution too soon. So what is it? So we connect them with the data and the evidence and the other perspectives of the problem. It's quite a painful process for some people.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
And so that's the other element, is we're trying to also help them understand that on your team you may have people who are that are great implementers, but it's really hard for them to be in that idea generation phase. And so we're helping give them the process to hold that space a little longer and do some reflection and look at, we hear so many times, we've already tried that, didn't work. And so in our process, we said, what didn't work about it? Today's a different day. We got a different climate. We've got a different situation. So maybe it didn't work last time, but we very rarely look at what are the elements that didn't work about it. And so we take them through this pretty exhaustive process of actually getting them to define the problem. And then we get them looking at who is this at the center of this problem. Is it a single mom? Is it an elder? We're doing a lot of work with the aging populations work. And so we try to get them to think, who is the person at the center of this problem? So we're applying user-centered design is what it's called. And so constantly thinking about the user and then bringing them in, if not throughout the whole process, very often and very early. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting them in a prototyping mindset, so testing things. So they're not in a room together for a year working on a pilot that they then put out. It's like, we have this idea, we think we want to test it, let's go test it on people and get feedback from them. And so, and then it's an iterative development of the process. So that's kind of where the innovation comes in also, is we put out a prototype to test it. If it fails, that's fine. What do we learn from it? And then we bring it in. So failure is not really a bad thing in innovation. It's a learning process. So what did we learn about that prototype? And what worked, what didn't work, and how do we bring that in to create that? And so those are kind of the methodologies that we're bringing people through.
Are you able to help people let go?
That's one of the biggest things.
Because this is how we do this.
Exactly.
Which goes back to your early talk about school systems.
Yeah.
And there must be another way to do this.
Yeah.
But when you're conditioned or trained, or you accept that this is how things are done, your first obstacle has to be, there are other ways to do this, so you have to let go.
Yeah.
Do you help?
So we're working with people in teams, but we're also working with people as individuals. So we have coaching for both levels, because we also know you've come to us through this 3-month, 6-month, 1-year program that NouLab would offer, but you're going to take that stuff back into your office, your home, whatever it is. How do you actually integrate that learning? And so we're really trying to do a lot of work to help that individual and the teams kind of let go of these assumptions. So one story, we were working with a team of retired individuals. They had a manager of a nursing home and some provincial government folks who were working on aging issue, the healthy aging environment. The issue that they were working on is the ageism and the negative impact that has on our seniors, the isolation, the mental health, that kind of thing. And so they brought this problem to us, and they were going through our process, and they were talking about ageism as if it only happens at one spectrum of the age. And so we got them to develop these personas. We're doing these user-centered design stuff. And so we were like, who are the potential people that are impacted by this issue? And so they would create a name and the person and build a little bit of who their community is. And so they had developed this, we got them to say, what are some assumptions you have about these people? And so there was and then we said, form those assumptions into questions. And then we were on Main Street in Moncton. We said, go out and ask people about that. So one of the assumptions that they had come to was young people have negative attitudes towards seniors. So they went out and they were asking people, do young people have negative attitudes towards seniors? And so one of the gentlemen on the team, he went, it was mid-afternoon, he went into a restaurant, it was dead, and the server was not busy. She was a young lady in mid-20s. And he said, look, I'm doing this research, I'm just wondering, do young people have negative attitudes towards seniors? And she said, I don't know, I do a knitting class once a week at a nursing home where I teach these women how to knit. And he was just like, so the whole team came back with stories like this. And so they they really, I mean, that was a 6-month program. Every workshop we did with them, met them twice, for 2 days, once a month, every month for 6 months. It took that many times, different little interactions of them realizing that ageism is also a problem in the youth. And they wanted to do, so they had come in with a solution also, so we had to get them to kind of let go of your solution, think about the problem. Well, they wanted to do programming in schools. And originally the program that they wanted to do in schools was have elders come in and teach the kids. And that was going to reduce ageism. And we brought a bunch of kids in and a bunch of youth in at several of the prototyping workshops that we did. And the program that they've come up with is a co-learning curriculum for youth and elders to learn together. Significant shift from what they originally thought. And they're just so pumped about it, and they've been prototyping it and getting an amazing kind of response. We had a 9-year-old at one of the workshops, and they were talking about this thing they wanted to do, is bring the elders in and teach, and she's the one that said, well, why don't they just create something together? You know, it was the wisdom from the young person, the young voice at the table. And so, yeah, there's just been lots of letting go individually and as the team, as we see them kind of go through this process. And so now they're working on this curriculum for intergenerational interactions that teachers can just plug into their existing curriculum. So it's not extra work for the teachers, it's just something that they can do to enhance their existing programming.
So the focus was on younger people understanding better older people. Mm-hmm. But there's a certain perspective on younger people that's just as biased or prejudiced. They're entitled, they're privileged, all that stuff. And most of the young people don't have the opportunities that those older people had, with one income that can support a household, or a 40-hour work week, or more than minimum wage. You know.
Exactly.
So did any of it loop back? That
it's doing that right now.
Okay, you sort of touched on it a bit, but I just wondered, well, ageism is ageism. It's not ageist, sort of. It isn't just about seniors, although we tend to apply that ageist word
so we had
to seniors, because there's 18 and 30-year-olds that are being put in a box right now.
Totally.
That is the last thing we should be doing, to tap onto their skill sets and their passions and their heart, to let them feel that it's safe to go and go create and go play. And rather than, you guys are so entitled and you walk around with your cell phones in front of your face and you don't, you know.
Exactly. And that's what they were finding. So we had brought in some youth to work with the team, and then they had made other connections. So we also encouraged the teams to kind of get out in the community as much as possible. And they had realized that, you know, the seniors, they knew, were finding that they didn't have as much decision-making power as they used to. They were feeling very isolated, and very kind of fringe of the community. And they started talking to the young people, they felt the same way. They had the same concerns in a different way, but at the root of it, they were all both very much having the same problems. And so just the huge eye-opening and extremely inspiring to watch people go through that shift in learning, both the young people that we saw participating, because also any young people that we brought in to work on this, they didn't know there was a problem with the seniors, that they were feeling isolated, or they only had their own example of, you know, their elders in their life, which maybe were limited the way we kind of structure our families now. We don't kind of keep them in our communities, and so the whole thing was just an amazing thing to watch, the learning on both sides. And the learning's not done. So they're continuing to develop the program. Like I said, they're developing it based on the feedback they're getting by testing it, and so all of this stuff that you mentioned is still happening. Yeah.
And will go on for quite a while. So you talked about Social Policy Research Network, networking with Pondeshpande, and then a new synthesis or synergy is occurring. And that's called NouLab. So have there been any breakthroughs? Because I remember when Social Policy Research Network opened up, the idea about how do we access all this data and start applying it to policy making, because the government might be working in isolation to this research that's current, so that a policy which might take 4 years to craft, to develop, and then get out on the street is missing the fact that the research now shows that that approach isn't going to get you where you want to go. Can you speak to, is NouLab the clutch between the gears that lets that fit together?
Yeah, a little bit, and I would say there's also a bunch of other people at the table. So I'm terrible with acronyms, and it's not in my specific wheelhouse with NouLab, but NBIRDT is also on UNB campus, and they're the ones that hold data and help analyze that data and give data sets out. And there's just been an agreement between them and the provincial government that the provincial government is actually going to release some data sets, because there's been a big barrier to actually, the provincial government has lots of data, but even internal departments aren't able to access it. And so it's making that data, there's a word for it in the data world, so it's not actually attached to any identity, so there's no privacy issues, but we can get such a wealth of information to help make decisions on. And so they've just created a partnership, and so that'll be something that we'll have access to for our teams, that policy decision makers will have access to. And so working in that to create this whole ecosystem of thinking and working in a new way. And then we were just talking earlier about New Brunswick being able to leapfrog. We're the size of Ottawa.
Yeah.
We have 750,000 people.
Yep.
It's like 1 degree of separation. We talk here long enough, Dennis, we probably know half the province, you know? That is an enormous advantage. You know, with NouLab, people come to us with a problem and we help them form a team around that problem. That's one of the things that this aging team, they were 3 retired people who had, from New Brunswick, but done their work in other places, had come back and didn't really have a network here. We were able to get the right person at social development around the table with them, the right person at the Department of Wellness around the table with them. They pitched to the Deputy Minister of Social Development and the 2 superintendents for the school district system. And so now they've got buy-in to use their curriculum, and social development gets the connection. You can't do that in Ontario. You know, this is an email. This is not weeks of work, and that way we know the people that we can bring to the table, and I don't know that we have capitalized on that. And I think we're talking about food issues, we're talking about transportation, all these things, we're so close, you know, to making some big shifts, and I think it's that network we need to tap into to make some really cool change. Yeah.
We have about 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how you want to wrap this up? It's been awesome.
Yeah.
Because of the energy you bring, but the perspectives, and then the hands-on experience with helping groups that aren't used to working with each other to learn how to work together. So maybe play with what you'd like to see the province do for the 2 or 3 minutes about where do we need to go next? Like, where can you lead us?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting learning the last year, looking at this approach and what the potential for it is. I think we've got some population issues, both from an aging population and dwindling population, in terms of we're not having as many babies as we can to kind of balance that out. And so that's creating a really weird phenomenon of there's a narrative out there that there's not enough jobs, and then when you talk to certain businesses, they're saying no to business because they can't find employees. So there's a certain
there's a gap.
There's a huge gap, and it's not just in low-skilled work. It is in low-skilled work. So our fisheries, our service industry, you're going to small communities. Most restaurants and things now have a Hope Wanted sign out. You can't find workers for that first line of service industry. Fisheries, manufacturing, those rural jobs, they're crying for work. If those businesses leave here because they can't find employees to do the work, they won't come back. So, and then the other side of it is that high IT industry, the high-level engineering decision-making, and those jobs, maybe one person that we're looking for that we can't find in New Brunswick, and even in Canada, actually, they're not able to find the employees that they need. Those create other jobs also. And so we've got to shift the narrative of there's no jobs in New Brunswick. There is true that there probably are no jobs for certain people, but there's also a whole bunch of jobs that we can't find people for. So there's a skills gap that we need to work on, I think, with our post-secondary institutions to be more responsive, and our high schools, about we're in a place with the economy right now, we're shifting so fast, you can't be trained in one thing and do that for the rest of your life. You got to be trained in how to learn so that you can change with the way the changes need to go. So that's one piece. And the other thing is we need to bring in people from other areas if we want to have sustainable communities. And we need to be welcoming. You know, we say that Maritimers are very nice, but we have a hard time inviting people over for dinner that we don't know. And I think the Syrian refugee settlement that just happened just put a light under the fire of how welcoming we can be. And how can we do that better to welcome people to want to come and live here and bring all of their wisdom from where they've been to kind of come and not be threatened by it. And so I think we talked about shifting narratives. There's a lot of narratives to shift, and that's a big one also, is that not to be scared of that new blood coming in. You and I wouldn't be here if there wasn't immigration. You know, like who are we to say that, you know? And that was just a different time where there was a flood of people in, and we need that again. And so, yeah, it's a complex problem, so it's not one answer, and it's not a fine line from cause and effect. But there's a couple of key things I think that we really need to work on. That's our education system, to be more responsive and to teach people to be responsive. It's not this, you know, the old way of teaching, and to be more welcoming and open to bringing in people here.
Perfect spot to end.
Yeah.
Thank you for this.
Thanks, Dennis. That was fun.
Great conversation. So thanks. Thank you for watching. Be good. Have fun. Love each other.